Malignancies. I am Dr. Naresh Kumar, Professor of Medicine and Head Pulmonary Medicine. You know, the lung neoplasm, lung cancers are the leading cause of cancer-related deaths. More so, it is even more than carcinoma prostate in males and carcinoma breast in females. Lung cancer is the most common cause of cancer-related deaths in the US also. According to the Globacon report 2018, lung cancer accounted for about 11.6% of all cancer and 18.4% of all cancer-related deaths. In India, new lung cancer cases were about 5.9% of all cancers, and it caused 8.1% of all cancer-related deaths. Tobacco smoking is this, it is seen in majority of cases as the cause of lung cancer. You must remember that current smokers, patients who are currently smoking, are 15 to 20 times more at the risk of death from the lung cancer than those patients who have never smoked. You must know that one genetic mutation is induced per 15 cigarettes intake, and patients with more limited smoking history are more likely to have EGFR mutations than those with history of heavy smoking. So smoking is one of the important cause of lung cancer. However, environmental tobacco smoke, ETS, and second-hand smoke, like if the spouse is smoking and the spouse gets exposure to it indirectly, that can also cause lung cancer. Then besides smoking, there are other risk factors that leads to the development of lung cancer that include asbestos, arsenic, chromium, mustard gas, nickel, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon exposures, and in most of the cases, exposure to these substances occurs as a part of occupational exposure. So occupational exposure is also very important in cases of lung cancer. Then low fruit and vegetable intake during adulthood. What does low fruit and vegetable intake signify? These are supposed to be the adding to the antioxidants. So if your intake of antioxidant is less, then you can have development of these cancers. Then ionizing radiation, exposure to ionizing radiation is one of the cause of development of lung cancer, and history of prior lung diseases is sometimes attributed to the causation of chronic bronchitis to the lung cancer. That includes the chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and even TB. Then there are other causes which are because of which the patients are predisposed to develop lung cancer. These inherited predispositions include the genetic makeup of the patients. Just coming on to the classification, what are all comes under lung cancer? First category is epithelial cancer, so we'll discuss in detail. Then the cancers might arise from mesenchyma. Then there could be lymphohistiocytic tumors, and then there could be tumors of ectopic origin like germ cell tumors and metastatic tumors. That means tumor in the lung because of tumor somewhere else metastasizing to the liver. So here we will discuss in detail epithelial tumors. So the epithelial lung cancers has four major cell histotypes. That includes small cell lung cancers, adenocarcinoma of lung, squamous cell carcinoma of lung, and large cell carcinoma of lung. So there are four histotypes: small cell lung cancers, adeno, squamous cell, and large cell carcinoma. Adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and large cell carcinoma. These three are collectively called as non-small cell lung cancers. So you will see that squamous cell carcinoma and small cell carcinoma are associated with heavy tobacco use. You remember 3S. They're all terms including S. So that's how you will remember it. So squamous cell carcinoma and small cell carcinoma are associated with smoking. Then when people have become aware that smoking causes lung cancers and the incidence of cancers, smoking has decreased, especially in the Western world. and that led to the adenocarcinoma being the most frequent histological types now in the US, as opposed to, yeah, as previously it was seen in squamous cell carcinoma was the predominant type, but now it is adenocarcinoma, which is most frequent histological subtype, and this can be asked in your PG entrance examination as well. Then after the etiology and basic histotypes, you can come to clinical features, that means presentation of patients, how patient presents with you. The carcinoma of lung can present with general symptoms by which any other disease of lung can present, like chronic cough, hemoptysis, shortness of breath, chest pain, and other systemic symptoms, including constitutional symptoms that include malaise, fever, weight loss. Then clubbing of fingers or toes can also be present. Then there could be symptoms related to the local compression, is chest pain, bone pain, superior vena cava obstruction, dysphagia, etc. So these are the few very common symptoms. Now we must know how we will know what symptoms they can produce. Just to make for your better clarity, you will see that clinical features by caused by lung cancer can be because of the primary lesion. It can be because of local tumor growth or invasion or obstruction of the adjacent structures. It can be because of distant metastasis, or it could be grouped under the paraneoplastic syndrome. So there could be four categories, four modes of presentation. So coming on to the presentation caused by primary tumor. So if the tumor is originating in the lung, it is called primary tumor. Though primary tumor could be central in location or peripheral in location. So if it is central or endobronchial growth is there, in that case, the patient can present with cough, hemoptysis, wheeze, stridor, dyspnea, and even post-obstructive pneumonia. If the growth or tumor is peripheral in location, it can cause pain from pleural and chest wall involvement, and it can also cause dyspnea on restrictive basis, and there could also be the lung abscesses due to cavitation of the mass. So this is how the primary tumor can present. Then if tumor has spread regionally or locally, in that case, because of the compression of enlargement of lymph node, compression or compression by tumor mass, patient can present with tracheal obstruction, patient can present with esophageal compression leading to dysphagia, recurrent nerve involvement that leads to recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy that will present as hoarseness of voice. Then you can have phrenic nerve palsy that will result in elevation of diaphragm on radiological things and dyspnea by symptomatology. Then you can have sympathetic nerve paralysis following involvement, and this can typically leads to Horner syndrome. This Horner syndrome is characterized by ptosis, meiosis, anhidrosis, and enophthalmos. There are many questions that can be asked in your MCQs, like Horner syndrome, why Horner syndrome is there, because of involvement of sympathetic nerve system, and then what are the components. So you must remember what is it. Then patient can also develop malignant pleural effusion that can lead to pain, dyspnea, and cough. Then because of regional spread, you can also have vascular obstructions, pericardial effusion, and arrhythmia and heart failure. Then lymphatic obstruction can also result in pleural effusion. Lymphangitic spread to lung parenchyma can result into hypoxemia and dyspnea. Then patient can also have constitutional symptoms, which can be, you can see as fever, anorexia, weight loss, night sweats. So these things, these symptoms, constitutional symptoms, you can see are also there in case of tuberculosis. So while dealing with a case of lung cancer, tuberculosis will always be in your differential diagnosis. Earlier you have seen that TB, chronic bronchitis, COPD, these are also included or associated with lung cancer. So these could be a causative, a cause also, and this could be in your differential diagnosis as well. Then a particular mention about Pancoast tumor, which is called superior sulcus tumor, is when there is local growth is extending in the apex of the lung. In this case, you will see there is involvement of cervical 8th and thoracic 1st and 2nd nerve that typically results in shoulder pain, and that relates to the distribution of ulnar nerve in that arm, the right side. And then you can also have in Pancoast tumor radiological destruction of 1st and 2nd thoracic rib. So a Pancoast tumor of upper lobe can present with severe pain in the shoulder region, and that will radiate to the ulnar aspect of the arm, to the hands. There could be associated atrophy of hands and arm muscles due to the damage to the brachial plexus. Then there could be local invasion of sympathetic nervous system that will cause Horner syndrome. Once again, just to reiterate, the symptoms will be ptosis, meiosis, anhidrosis, and ophthalmos. Then after the symptoms of primary tumor, after the symptoms of locally spreading tumor, you will see the symptoms because of extrathoracic metastatic disease. And you must know that it is one of the very notorious lung cancers, and it can virtually metastasize to every organ of the body. Most common of that include brain. The involvement of brain will lead to headache, nausea, vomiting, seizure, and focal neurological deficits. Involvement to or metastasis to bone will present as pain, pathological fracture, or cord compression. Metastasis to bone marrow will lead to cytopenia, leukoerythroblastosis. Liver metastasis will result into hepatomegaly, right upper quadrant pain. However, liver failures are rare. Then you can and liver metastasis can also result in fever, anorexia, weight loss. It can also metastasize to adrenal, but adrenal insufficiency and other manifestations are rare. So adrenal failures are not known because of this thing. Then coming on to paraneoplastic syndrome, the fourth type of manifestation. So these paraneoplastic syndromes are common in patients with lung cancer, especially with those of small cell lung carcinoma. And this could be the maybe even the presenting finding or the first sign of recurrence. These paraneoplastic syndromes, one thing you must remember that they may be relieved with successful treatment of the tumor. So what are the presentation first that we will see? The humoral hypercalcemia of malignancy. This hypercalcemia of malignancy is seen most commonly in squamous cell carcinoma, although other manifestations are more common with small cell lung carcinoma. Then syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone SIADH that causes euvolumic hyponatremia, and that is most commonly seen in patients with small cell lung carcinoma. Then it could present as ectopic ACTH production manifesting as carcinoid lesions. These are also more common with small cell lung carcinoma, and this can typically present with hypokalemia and other electrolyte imbalances. Then it could also be manifested as Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome that will manifest as muscle weakness, especially the proximal muscle weakness, due to the autoantibodies formation against the presynaptic calcium channels in patients with small cell lung carcinoma. What you have to remember is it can present with proximal myopathy. These are because of antibodies against presynaptic calcium channel blockers. This can be asked in your MCQs and most common in case of small cell lung cancers. So we have seen the presentation of lung cancer clinical features that can be because of four modes. One is because of primary tumor, other is because of local spread, third is because of distant metastasis, and fourth is paraneoplastic syndromes that are very much common with lung cancers. Now, once you know how the patient can present, when the patient comes with this presentation and you suspect that lung cancer can be there, you need to diagnose it and rule out other conditions like tuberculosis and other lesions or maybe benign lesions. So what are the modalities that are available to us for the diagnosis? The older available modalities include sputum and pleural fluid for malignant cytology, chest X-ray for looking for mass lesion, then pulmonary function test and CCT test which is used to diagnose that it is a mass, and then site and staging of the tumor, how much extent is there, the tumor spread, then status of mediastinal and hilar lymphadenopathy, then whether there is associated pleural effusion, or if there is any metastasis in liver, adrenal, or gland or bone, that can also be seen in CT chest. Then once you diagnose that lung mass is there and it could be malignant, then you must know how much is the extent of the disease. It is locally spread or it has metastasized systemically. Then for that you can go for PET-CT. That will pick up all the hot spots or all the areas of malignancy in the body. Then there is one thing that you have to differentiate. PET-CT can also pick up other sites of inflammation and areas of high metabolic rates, but there, I mean, the strengths are different, but we have to differentiate it with that. Then after the imaging, you have to go for tissue diagnosis, and that may be possible, and that will depend on the location of the disease. If it is central or endobronchial, then you will go for bronchoscopy, and you will also assess for operability. And then, so your approach can be even transthoracic or transbronchial. If it is peripheral, then it could be approach could be transthoracic. If it is central, approach will be transbronchial. So you can take FNA, fine needle aspiration, from peripheral lesions or superficial lymph nodes if it has metastasized to that, and transbronchial if it is central or endobronchial. So appropriate method has to be selected. Then the whole body bones scintigraphy for suspected bone metastasis, and this could be used when in conjunction with relevant clinical findings such as bone pain, elevated alkaline phosphatase, and hypercalcemia. So you have to, I always teach that after the history taking, once you make your differential diagnosis, the examination is guided and investigation is, in all the cases is guided. You are not supposed to do all the investigation. So what is the location, what is the extent, that will decide the mode of further investigations. MRI brain is required if you suspect metastasis to the brain. Then in bronchoscopy, you will see nowadays fiber optic bronchoscopy is done, and the lesions locating up to subsegmental bronchus can be detected and biopsied using fiber bronchoscopy. The diagnostic yield for FBS is although low, ranging from 20 to 60%. The methods that include or procedures that might include is transbronchial biopsy, even bronchial washings and bronchial brushings can improve the diagnostic yield for the lesions that are not directly visible by fiber optic bronchoscope. For peripheral lung lesions, as I have told you, that can be reached by routine, that cannot be reached by bronchoscope because they are peripheral in location. Fluoroscopic guided transbronchial lung biopsy can increase the accuracy, or transthoracic modes can be applied, or transbronchial lung biopsy can be added under the guidance of fluoroscopy. That will give increased diagnostic accuracy. Then the yield can be increased by immediate on-site interpretation of fine needle aspiration smears, in which there is immediate on-site smear evaluation of cytopathologist, and advantages is more pronounced in deep body situated when FNA is guided by CT or ultrasound, because many of the times you are not able to repeat the procedures. So you will increase the yield by immediate on-site cytology, and that will avoid the chances of repeat procedure. Then you can, the TBNA or biopsy can also be guided by EBUS, endobronchial ultrasound, under the ultrasound machine, which is very tiny. You can insert into the along with the bronchoscope, and under the guidance of ultrasound, you can locate where is the mass, and then under the guidance you can take needle aspiration. The position of the target lesion is conferred based on the real-time ultrasound images. Sometimes you must have seen that you mark the site for kidney biopsy, and then at the later time you do the biopsy on that site which you have pre-marked. Here you do it under the real-time ultrasound images. The diagnostic yield for EBUS TBNA is high with a sensitivity of to 90%. Then EBUS using a guide sheath can also be used using a radial EBUS probe. Radial EBUS probe, that means probe is within the bronchus and you can have images from all around like circles and you can locate the lesion. Then using a radial EBUS probe, it is possible to do the biopsy from peripheral lung lesions just surrounding the tip of the probe, and the image of radial type EBUS can be obtained using a guide sheath, in which biopsy forceps and bronchial brushes can also be placed using GS. This method is technically superior to fiber optic bronchoscopy or EBUS guided, and that can be helpful in assessing small peripheral lung lesions. Then those lesions which are peripheral or near to the chest wall, they typically can be biopsied by CT guided needle or aspiration can be done. So this is how you can go for taking the histology. However, there are some contraindications to the procedures. If there is bleeding diathesis, low platelet count, prolonged PT-APTT, pulmonary hypertension is there in case of COPD, then this case, there are contraindications. So you must assure that there is no bleeding diathesis, platelet count and PT are at the optimum level, like more than 60,000. Then only you will go for CT guided biopsy. You can go for gun biopsy, in which core biopsies you can perform without causing crushing injuries. So the specimen obtained from core biopsies increase the rate of definite benign disease, and the diagnostic yield of core biopsy is superior to that of FNACs. Then there is increased associated risk of complications like pneumothorax and pulmonary hemorrhage in case of biopsy by gun biopsy. Then other tests that include genomic alterations, genetic workup, in which you will look for many mutations like EGFR, ALK, or ROS1, BRAF, VEGF, KRAS, RAT, and MET. Then you can also go for immunological markers such as programmed cell death PD1 and PD ligand 1. So these are more of academic thing, but you must know these can be asked in your MCQs. So immunohistochemistry test used in differential diagnosis for adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, neuroendocrine marker identification, that driver mutation assessment and differential diagnosis of lung cancer and mesothelioma. This is where it is used. Thyroid transcription factor 1 and Nepsin A are used as markers of adenocarcinoma. Then P40, CK5/6 and TP63 can be used as squamous cell carcinoma markers. Chromogranin A, synaptophysin or CD56 is required for the diagnosis of large cell neuroendocrine tumors and in NETs. Then ALK D5F antibody is used for ALK rearranged non-small cell carcinoma as a companion diagnostic. These things, these markers, you must be aware. This can be asked in your MCQs. Then IHC methods for PD-L1 and PD1, that varies between providers. Right? And then calretinine, BAP1, odoplanin, CK5, CK5/6, and WT1 can be potentially used for diagnosis of mesotheliomas. So now you know how the patients will be investigated. The purpose of the investigation are two. One is to diagnose that it is lung cancer, and second is to see the spread of the disease, whether it is limited, locally spread, or metastasized. So for that, after the diagnosis, you will go for staging. So because staging will be required for deciding about the treatment. So for staging, there can be two types of staging. One is anatomical staging, how far the tumor has spread anatomically, that means location wise. anatomical location, where it is locally or distally. And there is also one term, physiological staging, in which basically we will do cardiopulmonary assessment or other assessments to look for the suitability of the patients for surgical procedures in case it is required. Surgical procedures, like if you want to take the tumor, how much lung has to be operated out, like pneumonectomy is required, lobectomy will suffice, or subsegmental resection, how much surgery is to be done. So you will look for the fitness of patient for these surgical procedures. Then coming on to management of non-small cell cancer, just in summary, you will see that any patient whom you have diagnosed, the important things are that you have taken the complete history and physical examination. You have determined the performance status, weight loss in this condition, complete blood count, platelet, and other things that you have measured, measurement of serum electrolyte, glucose, calcium, KFT, LFT, these things you have done. PET scan you have done to evaluate the status of mediastinum and detect metastatic disease, and MRI if you suspected brain involvement, brain metastasis. So you can see if no signs or symptoms or imaging is there to suggest metastatic disease, patient has no contraindication to surgery or radiation therapy combined with chemotherapy. You look for pulmonary function tests and EBG measurements. Cardiopulmonary exercise testing can be done to ensure this, and coagulation test has done. Patient can be referred to surgeon for evaluation of mediastinum and possible resection. So if you know, it is the one thing about staging I just forgot to know, would tell you that the staging you will do with TNM staging for anatomical, and since 6th or 7th edition, staging is used for non-small cell carcinoma, and 6th is used for small cell carcinoma. That you will see in the book. This whole chart is given. So if there is N0 or N1 nodes, in that case the patient will fall into stage 1A or stage 1B, or it can be stage 2 or 3. So if it is stage 1A, the surgery alone might suffice. If it is stage 1B, that is tumor is less than 4 centimeters, surgery alone will be sufficient. If tumor is more than 4 centimeters, surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy can be done. If it is stage 2 or 3, surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy can be done. And if it is already N2 or N3 nodes involvement, then surgery is not to be done, and treatment will be done with combined chemotherapy, chemoradiation therapy. So if you'll see, if there is multiple lesions which are detected on imaging suggesting the metastatic disease, you will take biopsy from that lesion. If it is negative for metastatic disease, then you will follow the path of limited disease. And if it is positive for metastatic disease, then you will go for systemic disease therapy as the disease already has spread. Then what are the modalities of surgical resection for non-small cell lung carcinoma? Under the removal of lung pneumonectomy, you will see that you can go for lobectomy. In this surgery, the entire lobe containing the tumor is removed. This is often the preferred type of operation for non-small cell carcinoma if it can be done. Then you can also go for segmentectomy or wedge resection. In these surgeries, only part of lobe is removed. Or you can go for sleeve resection. In this, then operation may be used to treat some cancers in large airways in the lungs, also where the anatomical margins are not marked. And you can go for all these procedures by video assisted thoracoscopic mode. Now the fitness for this pneumonectomy is also determined by the performance status or cardiopulmonary status. Like if the FEV1 is more than 2 liters, in that case you can safely go for lobectomy. If it is less than that or more than 1.5, you can go for segmentectomy or wedge resection. Sometimes it happens that poor performance status can lead to less invasive surgery. In that case, tumor can remain there, or because of incomplete resection, you can have recurrence of the tumor. So these are the limitations. In this case, the case is not always straightforward that what your books say you will be able to do in a patient. So these are the limitations that you will face in a patient. Then coming on to chemotherapy for non-small cell lung cancers, it is carboplatin or cisplatin base plus vinrolebin. For metastatic cancers, primary treatment will use cisplatin plus premixed. For non-squamous cell to cisplatin plus gemcitabine, or maintenance treatment Pemtex. Erlotinib can be used, bevacizumab can be used, but not in squamous cell carcinoma. The targeted therapy might include angiogenesis inhibitors. The typical of this is bevacizumab, which is a monoclonal antibody that targets VEGF, and this treatment is contraindicated in squamous cell carcinoma because of chances of hemorrhagic tendencies. Then ramucirumab, it is a monoclonal antibody that targets VEGF receptor and is safe in squamous cell carcinoma also. Then you can use the drugs that target cells with EGFR changes, and these include erlotinib, afatinib, and gefitinib. EGFR inhibitors that are used in squamous cell carcinoma include necitumumab. Side effects of EGFR inhibitors may include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, mucositis, elevated transaminases, and myocarditis. The drugs that target cells with ALK gene, and that will include crizotinib, which is also effective in those with ROS1 gene rearrangements, elacetinib, and in second generation you can have ceritinib, brigatinib, ensartinib, and third generation lorlatinib. The intracranial penetration is better with second and third generation of ALKIs, so it is used when CNS metastasis is there. Adverse events might include the most commonly nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, asthenia, raised liver enzymes. Crizotinib has higher incidences of visual disorders such as diplopia, photopsia, blurred vision, and vitreous floaters. Severe side effects like QT prolongations, myocarditis are rare with second and third generation ALKIs. Then another category of therapy is immunotherapy for NSCL. So immune checkpoint inhibitors, which work by blocking interactions between T cells and APCs, antigen presenting cells, are used, and hence upregulating the immune system and activating T cells against tumor cells. So these are used. This includes nivolumab and pembrolizumab. The side effect of immunotherapy includes flu-like syndrome, including fever, rash, diarrhea, myalgia, arthralgia. It can also cause cough, abdominal pain, hepatitis, myocarditis, and nephritis. So these chemotherapeutic agents, as you know, are never without risks. Then immunotherapy can also be done through vaccine development, in which the tumor or whole cell vaccine are developed from autologous or allogenic tumor cells, and these vaccines work by exposing the host immune system to various tumor associated antigens, and against which the antibodies are formed, which can kill the tumor cells. So this is the hypothesis. Then coming on to management of small cell lung cancer. The small cell lung cancers, in contrast to non-small cell lung cancers, are highly aggressive disease. So most of the times they are diagnosed at a very late stage. However, there is dramatic response to chemotherapy and radiations, and surgeries are not routinely recommended. This is maybe because of the increased incidences of micrometastasis. Like by the time you will work out for the patient can already have micrometastasis elsewhere in the body at distant sites, and surgery will not be effective. So small cell lung carcinomas are highly aggressive disease. They respond better to chemotherapy and radiation. So the shift is in the treatment by chemotherapy and radiation rather than surgery. So in small cell lung cancer, as in case of non-small cell, you have seen that you have taken complete history and physical examination has been done. You have determined the performance status, assess the weight loss. You have done complete blood count, platelet determination, electrolytes, glucose, calcium, LFTs, KFT, You have also done the PET scan to evaluate the metastatic disease and seen the MRIs of brain to stage the disease. And then if you see that there are no signs, symptoms or imaging evidences to suggest metastatic disease, if the patient has no contraindication to combine chemotherapy and radiation therapy, you will go for combined modality treatment with platinum-based therapy and etoposide and radiation therapy. If patient has contraindication to combine chemotherapy and radiation therapy, you will see that you can go for sequential treatment with chemotherapy and radiation therapy. And if you suspect metastatic disease, then you work up on imaging and laboratory investigations to rule out or prove that. Then if you see that biopsy of most distant site of the disease is negative for metastatic disease, then you will work up as the patient has limited disease, as I have told you earlier, or if it is positive for metastatic disease, then you will go for chemotherapy alone and or radiotherapy for palliation of symptoms. So chemotherapy for small cell lung carcinoma includes first line treatment with cisplatin or carboplatin based plus etoposide or irinotecan. Second line of chemotherapy in this case include topotecan. So you will see in short that was about lung cancers. So what we have learned in this is if you suspect lung carcinoma in any patient, you will go for history taking. You will take the history about the risk factors like smoking, occupational exposure to asbestos, other things, other diseases including TB, chronic bronchitis, COPD, etc. Then the presentation of the disease, how patient has presented. Is it indicates to central location or peripheral location? Then you go for appropriate radiological investigations to look for the extent of the disease and also to look for stage of disease after you have done the histological diagnosis. Histological diagnosis is important for treatment because the treatments are different, whether it is small cell lung carcinoma or non-small cell lung carcinoma. So in TNM staging, you have seen that you will use 6th or 7th addition TNM staging, and you will also perform the cardiopulmonary status so that you can determine the resectability of the tumor. In non-small cell carcinoma, the predominant, highly frequently used treatment is surgical followed by, or if need be, chemoradiation. However, in small cell carcinoma, which is more aggressive, which metastasizes quickly, diagnosed because of this reason only diagnosed at a very advanced stage, or if it seems to be, only locally advanced, in that case also you can have micrometastasis. So surgery remains a lesser possibility, and you go for chemoradiation. The drugs you have seen, then there could be many MCQs that can be asked in this question that I have already indicated during the lectures. So this is all about the lung cancers that you have to study. Go through your books and read it. If you have any problem, you can ask during the classes. Thank you so much.